It's Wednesday, the 15th of December. Welcome to Euronews with me, Sarah Green. Our top stories this hour.
Italy, the Netherlands and the UK bring in tougher pandemic restrictions in the wake of rising Omicron cases. President Joe Biden will visit the state of Kentucky following last Friday's devastating cyclones. Malta makes history by becoming the first EU country to legalise the growing and personal use of cannabis.
Italy insists all those working in the country's schools must be vaccinated against COVID-19. The rule covers the entire vaccination cycle, including the obligation to get a third dose or booster shot. The decision comes amid growing concerns over the spread of the Omicron variant. And mandatory jabs are being imposed on other workers too. Police, military and emergency services personnel must conform or face sanctions, which can include suspension from work without pay. While Omicron is fast-moving, indications are that the symptoms may well be less severe than the Delta variant, but the head of the WHO had this warning.
Surely, we have learned by now that we underestimate this virus at our peril. Even if Omicron does cause less severe disease, the sheer number of cases could once again overwhelm unprepared health systems.
Scientists in the Netherlands believe within weeks Omicron could be the dominant COVID variant in the country. To limit the spread, the outgoing cabinet is also extending anti-COVID measures, including closing schools earlier for the Christmas holidays.
This extension of measures means that during Christmas and the Christmas holiday, a maximum of 4 guests remain the norm. The rule, therefore, is not to receive more than 4 people over 13 years of age at home. There will be no exception for Christmas and New Year.
The Omicron effect is being felt across Europe. Scotland's no exception. People are being urged to curb their festive gatherings too. Hopes of a normal Christmas this year are fading fast.
By 369 votes to 126, MPs in the House of Commons have voted to introduce a COVID health pass in England for access to certain venues such as nightclubs. The restriction was widely contested within the Conservative Party, with 98 Tory MPs voting against the government, accusing it of scaremongering. This prompted the Health Secretary to defend the measure.
Despite the progress that we've made, the NHS will never have unlimited numbers of beds and nor unlimited numbers of people to look after anyone that is in those beds. So if we think that capacity risks being breached, then we simply have to step in.
Among the other proposals in Plan B, presented last Thursday by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, MPs approved the wearing of masks in most indoor spaces, except for pubs and restaurants. Finally, representatives approved by 385 votes the plan to make vaccination against COVID compulsory for frontline workers in the NHS in England. With the Omicron variant spreading rapidly across the country, the government is aiming to speed up its vaccination programme, with London aiming to offer a third dose of vaccine to all adults by the end of December. The UK is now set to join other European countries in implementing a COVID-19 passport. Although the vote passed by a large majority in Westminster amongst the Conservatives, the restriction was very divisive. Political commentator Jonathan Liss says the vote may have shown further cracks in Boris Johnson's government following last week's Christmas party scandal revelations.
It was the Labour Party which got this vote over the line. That's objectively terrible for any government to have to rely on the opposition to get its agenda across, particularly when there is such a large majority as Boris Johnson has. And so really, it's not just about COVID. It's also about Johnson's opponents on the benches behind him, that they are becoming emboldened to oppose him, and that spells real trouble for his authority. And even people who are sympathetic to these measures think that it's part of a distraction tactic by Downing Street to stop people talking about the law breaking at Downing Street, which Johnson may or may not have known about. It seems that he also participates in, according to photographs on the weekend. And so a lot of people are very angry about that. And I think it's a justified criticism that the government is using COVID as a political tool. Even people who believe that there should be tighter measures to counter Omicron believe that Downing Street is weaponizing this issue for its own political capital, which is obviously terrible in a situation where you need public support and trust and goodwill to actually implement these measures.
Monsieur le Président, certains vous reprochent d'avoir bénéficié de l'impunité judiciaire.
President Joe Biden is due to visit Kentucky in the wake of last Friday's devastating tornadoes. The town of Mayfield was hardest hit by the barrage of twisters that tore through Kentucky and 5 other surrounding states, killing dozens of people of all ages, including a 2-month-old infant. On what once was a housing development in the city of Bowling Green, survivors are mourning the deaths of 14 of their neighbours, including 7 youngsters.
I believe they were in separate houses, one house and next house to it, but they decided to get in the first house together, and unfortunately the house was just demolished to the ground.
And forecasters say more bad weather is on the way. The authorities have warned those in Kentucky to be prepared for being without power and even running water for some time because of damage to utilities, while temperatures have been below freezing at night.
Brussels wants to curb the power of big tech companies in Europe by ensuring a higher degree of competition in the sector. On Tuesday, MEPs debated the so-called Digital Markets Act, which aims to prevent so-called gatekeepers like Google and Facebook from abusing their market power by allowing new players to enter the market more easily. MEPs also want to end anti-competitive practices within the sector, as the leading lawmaker on the issue explains.
We have been seeing in the last 11 years that the European Commission in applying competition policy was not very successful because they were always running behind companies like Apple, Google and Facebook. And now we have changed the burden of proof. Now the Commission can talk to them even on beforehand, before they enter new markets, before they introduce new business models. And that will be very positive for consumers and users because the business models have to be fair and equitable. And that was not the case in the past.
So what is a gatekeeper? Well, it's the provider of so-called core platform services like search engines, app stores and social media networks. The new rules would stop gatekeepers from prohibiting or favouring a particular service, whilst also preventing interoperability between different rival platforms. They also wouldn't be able to stop businesses that use their services from using data on their own customers. If tech companies fail to comply with the new rules, then penalties of up to 10% of their turnover could be imposed. And in the case of systematic rule violations, extraordinary remedies like an obligation to sell part of the company's assets could apply. The European Consumers Association says the measures are a positive step.
You should be able to use your messaging service of your own choice in order to communicate with your peers, with your family and friends. Another big improvement will be also that you will have the possibility to choose upfront, for example, which search engine you want to use without Google search being pushed onto you constantly by Google.
Big tech companies say the new rules will curb innovation, but Brussels is convinced that more rights for users means more democracy in a world that is increasingly interconnected. Christo Pitches, Euronews, Brussels.
After a marathon meeting that started Sunday morning, EU ministers in charge of the fishing sector have sealed a deal on fishing quotas for the year 2022. setting the rules of the game for commercial fishermen and women in the Atlantic, the North Sea, the Mediterranean and the Black Sea.
The profitability and sheer survival of our fisheries sector depend on healthy fish stocks. I know that some of the measures are difficult, but let me reassure you, nobody should undertake these steps alone.
For landlocked countries, there's not a lot at stake, but fishing hubs like France and Spain feel in the firing line. Spain, for its part, faces cuts for the third year in a row. The agreement reached includes an 8% cut in southern hake in the Cantabrian Sea and a decrease of 5% in Seoul.
We need to preserve fishing resources and also the economy of many fishing villages and the way of life of locals.
But for NGOs like Our Fish, who recently painted this mural in Vilnius to put pressure on the Lithuanian EU Commissioner in charge of the oceans, the EU needs to commit to stop overfishing. The Mediterranean is in danger, they say, from overfishing and pollution. Ocean Rebellion dressed up as dead fish to raise awareness.
Oceana regrets that fisheries ministers have lost an opportunity to ensure the sustainable exploitation of all fish populations in European Union waters, and instead they have decided to exceed the scientific advice for around 35% of the Atlantic fish populations, and they were not ambitious enough in the reduction of the fishing effort in the Mediterranean.
Meanwhile, tough negotiations continue with London for quotas in waters shared with Britain. Maeve McMahon, Euronews, Brussels.
Malta has become the first EU country to legalise the growing and personal use of cannabis. Adults can now possess up to 7 grams and cultivate 4 plants. But smoking it in public will remain illegal, and using it in front of children will be punishable with a possible €500 fine. Editor of the Times of Malta, Herman Gretsch, explains.
Malta's been making these incredible steps, I would say, to more liberal steps in the last 11 years. This is an island where 11 years ago we didn't even have divorce legislation. And we've gone from that to enacting divorce legislation. We introduced gay marriage and quite possibly the most progressive LGBT rights in Europe. So it came as almost the next progressive law by our government. This did not come easily. There's a lot of objections to the law. I mean, there hasn't been any referendum or anything of the sort. But Maltese society has changed. There is more tolerance towards, these kinds of laws, which in the past would have been unthinkable. It's not because there's huge pressure from society to introduce it, but for the government, it seems to have been a more natural progression. The changes that have been going on in the last few years, it seems to have been, next bit will be towards cannabis use. The government saying we're doing this because we need to stop, we need to clamp down on the criminals who are selling cannabis. We can't keep putting young people behind bars. But it went one step further because now you can basically smoke cannabis at home. We need to be very careful. The law does not say that you can just go out and smoke it in the streets. This is for personal use, and that you will be allowed to buy it from approved sellers.
Trenitalia has had a breakthrough in France, ending the monopoly of the French state railways firm SNCF. It's the first European operator to enter France since high-speed lines were opened to competition last year. The inaugural journey of the Italian train will be on Saturday, leaving early in the morning from Milan, stopping at Turin, Modane, Chambéry and Lyon before finally arriving in Paris. Shortly after, another Italian train will depart Paris on the reverse journey to Milan. 2 more trips, 1 outbound and 1 return, are scheduled for the afternoon. The new Italian rail service is expected to have a busy start, as its launch coincides with a strike by SNCF workers in France. According to Trenitalia, the Milan to Paris route should take about 6.5 hours. Tickets are already on sale at trenitalia.com with prices from €23 to €29, substantially lower than the equivalent French TGV fares.
The Canadian government has pledged $40 billion to compensate Indigenous people who faced abuses as children in residential schools. The funds will also be used to reform the country's troubled child welfare system. At one time, Indigenous children were separated from their families and sent to the schools where they often faced physical and sexual abuse. At least 6,000 died. At least 60 people have died after a fuel tanker overturned and exploded in northern Haiti. The blast unleashed a fireball that swept through homes and businesses. Reports say the driver of the tanker had swerved, trying to avoid a motorcyclist. Onlookers then rushed in with buckets to scoop up the spilled fuel, which had then leaked near a pile of smouldering rubbish. Global warming alarm bells are ringing after a temperature of 38 degrees was measured in Siberia last year. It was recorded in June 2020 in the Russian town of Verkhoyansk and is the highest temperature ever recorded within the Arctic Circle. Described as more befitting the Mediterranean than the Arctic, it was measured during a prolonged Siberian heatwave.
Experienced divers from Greece, the Netherlands and Britain have pulled 3 tons of ghost nets from the sea around the island of Patroklos and other parts of Greece's Saronic Gulf. The 2-day project that took place in early December, led by the Healthy Seas and Ghost Diving Organisation, focused on Patroklos, a mere kilometre from the mainland. The ancient island belongs to the network of EU protected areas, known as Natura 2000. And is particularly affected by the materials from an abandoned fish farm. Discarded on the sea floor, local fishermen dove down and collected the nets before transporting them to the nearby port city of Lavrio. Some 640,000 tonnes of fishing gear are lost or abandoned in the seas and oceans each year. They cause serious damage to the ecosystem, trapping marine animals and polluting the water with microplastics. However, these nets, which are made of nylon, are recycled. Econyle yarn, a pioneering sustainable material, is partially made from the abandoned nets and used to make bespoke swimwear. This is a Belgian coffee, grown, harvested and roasted in the heart of Liège. While most of the world's coffee comes from Brazil, the Plant World Observatory accomplished this particular feat using 3 Arabica coffee trees. The first harvest generated a mere 1.3 kilograms of coffee, enough to make 100 cups. For a fee of €6, coffee lovers can enjoy a fresh cup of espresso.
A bit subtle, a bit acidic, so really nice.
You can tell the sweetness in this coffee.
While coffee remains the world's second most popular drink, its cultivation leads to deforestation. However, with this tiny crop, it's different, says biologist Sophie Petours.
We grow the coffee trees almost without fertiliser, and when we use fertiliser, it's organic fertiliser, no chemicals at all. In addition, the roasting process is completely traditional, so it's probably one of the best coffees you could find in terms of cost on the planet.
Once harvested, the beans were dried in a small machine before they were transported to a former coffee roaster just a few kilometres away. For Belgian coffee enthusiasts, the next tasting is scheduled for the 9th of January.
That's it for now, but do stay with us as we bring you all the latest from across Europe and beyond. You can also find more on our website, euronews.com.